Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the aftermath of the Brussels attacks and what the consequences will be in the company of British Labour member of the European Parliament, Claude Morris, who joins us from London. He chairs the European Parliament's Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee. With us from Brussels is Sophia in 't Veld, Dutch social liberal member of the European Parliament. And here in the studio, we say hello once again to Guillaume Denoy de Saint-Marc of the French Association for the Victims of Terrorism and intellectual property attorney Etienne Drouard. Welcome back to all of you. Claude Morris says he doesn't like to see finger pointing in the wake of an attack like the one we saw on Tuesday. Well, there was a bit this morning when the French finance minister, Michel Sapin, was asked how Belgium had proved to be a very soft target indeed for jihadists.
I don't know if I should say it's Belgium in particular, but there seems to have been a belief amongst certain politicians that to allow a better integration, we should let some communities just develop on their own. Maybe this comes from being overly naive. But here in France, we especially know that a republic is not formed out of the juxtaposition of different communities, but of their integration.
Guillaume Denoy de Saint-Marc, is he right?
It's a big debate, you know. I'm working in the radicalization awareness network. We have a lot of British attending to these meetings, and we have our French specificity with integration and the debate integration or not. I think there is no good recipe.
Good recipe.
A good recipe. There was some bad things that happen everywhere, but it's true that we don't have the same culture. That's for sure. So we have to adapt the way we respond to these attacks in a different way. Everybody's a target in Europe for the moment. This time it was Belgium. Last time it was France. So nobody should give any lessons to anyone.
All right, nobody should give any lessons to everyone. The French Prime Minister, he did a bit of damage control because he was in the Belgian capital. But even before he left for Brussels, Manuel Valls did sort of rectify what Michel Sapin had said on Breakfast Radio.
We closed our eyes everywhere in Europe, including France, to the progression of extremist ideas. Salafism, neighborhoods in which, through a combination of drug trafficking and radical Islamism, perverted, and I'll use this word again, a part of the youth. But this is what we need to do, and I'm not here to lecture the Belgians, because I'm sure they're more than aware of this.
Sophia in 't Veld, what's your reaction to hearing those French politicians reacting to the way Belgium has handled the manhunt for those jihadists?
Well, there's a lot that can be said about Belgium, but I would say that the French government has its own issues with the banlieue. And when you said earlier that, are we talking about a war on terrorism? I think we should also realize that we are talking about our own youngsters, people who were born here, our own citizens. In that context, the term foreign fighters is really not accurate. We're talking about European citizens. And I really think we should ask ourselves a question. Why is it that messages of extremism, violent extremism, resonate with some and not with others? Because we need to understand that. Why are certain people susceptible to these messages and others are not? The majority actually aren't. And unless we understand, unless we have the right diagnosis, we cannot find the right remedy. And all the measures that have been taken basically since 9/11 are all measures designed to fight the problem at the very end of the process. We should start at the beginning and prevent violent extremism. And there are also examples, also in Belgium, like in the city of Malines, for example, where the mayor, Bart Somers, has done a fantastic job because they've got so far 0 jihadis traveling to Syria. And they're really focusing on prevention, on inclusion, on detecting radicalization at the very start, and making sure that they reach out to young people before it's too late. And we also have to ask ourselves, about the situation that we've seen in Brussels in recent weeks. What happens? How is it possible that somebody can hide for 4 months in the neighborhood? I mean, that person has had help. And this has happened under the noses of the police. I mean, how is it possible that there are no-go areas for the police? How is it possible that the police doesn't know what's going on in the neighborhood? I mean, we need to invest much more in those aspects, and not only in the repressive measures, which are basically, targeting the final phases of the whole process, because.
And is that a European? Sophia? Is that a European problem, or is that a problem of a Belgium divided between French speakers and Dutch speakers, where there's 6 different layers of policing inside the capital, and where services don't speak to each other?
It's not an exclusively Belgian problem, because we've seen similar problems in the French or the Parisian banlieue. So, and I think, in the European Union, what we should do is look at good practice. There are good practices. I just gave the example of the city of Malines, also in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and I'm usually very critical of the Dutch government, but I think here they did get it right, and there's a lot being done in terms of prevention, and that is of course much better than having to fight the phenomenon once the attacks have taken place. And I think we should learn from each other there. And I'm a bit irritated by the French government, which is it's criticizing the Belgian authorities the whole time, and maybe with very good reasons. But I would say, why don't you start solving the problems in the banlieue, because I have not seen that the government has done a whole lot there. And the problems still exist, and radicalization is still going on. And instead, the French government is nearly obsessed with repressive measures, mass surveillance. They're really completely obsessed with the passenger name records. Instead of trying to find all the right instruments, effective instruments, focusing mainly on prevention. So.
Let me ask Claude Morris on this, because how do you feel if you're French, Claude, and you see that the Paris attacks are orchestrated from this working class neighborhood of Brussels, Molenbeek, and that 4 months on, that same cell is still very, very active?
What I would do is I would remember that there was 7/7 bombings orchestrated by cult-like jihadists from the north of England. That's what I would remember. And I would remember that tomorrow it could happen in Italy. It could happen in Stockholm. It could happen in Denmark. It has happened in Denmark. So let's just be very clear here. There are 2 pillars to this. There is a security pillar. There is the idea of what has happened in terms of intelligence and all of the solutions there. And then there is radicalization and the external threat of ISIL and ISIS. Because what is happening here is that, politicians will fill the gap and they will say certain things. But we have learned the lesson that radicalization, we don't have the luxury anymore of thinking that we have certain cultural norms in different countries which either are good or bad for radicalization. We now know definitively that radicalization occurs in many EU countries. That's a fact. And we will now have possible atrocities in many EU countries. This cult-like jihadism is not exclusive to France or Belgium. It exists in other countries. So now we have to get down to de-radicalization measures. We have to understand what foreign fighters are. They are mostly homegrown. And we have to deal with that. And all of this kind of displacement activity of talking about cultural norms and, whether one country has a better multicultural attitude than another, I think is very much displacement theory. And it's not good for this debate. We don't have the luxury
Let me bring it back
then
on this. Let me bring it back to the question of intelligence, because jihadism has gone global, but as Guillaume Denoy de Saint-Marc was saying in part 1 of our discussion, there's different yardsticks across Europe when it comes to how much privacy you give up. You are in favor of these passenger names being shared among the EU 28.
Addressing me?
Claude Morris. Claude Maurice, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. The way that the French Prime Minister phrased this, as though the Parliament wants it or not, we are a Parliament of different views. And what is going to happen is that passenger name records has already been voted through a relevant committee, and it's going to go to the plenary of the European Parliament in May. And when it does, it is almost definitely likely to be voted through.
And why are you in favour?
I don't see any issue there. A lot of hard work has gone into it to create a proper balance between security on the one hand and privacy and civil liberties on the other. And we want, and people have their views about this legislation, but we are a parliament. And I don't see any mileage to be gained from discussing anything other than this will be presented to the Parliament and, as I say, more than likely to be voted through. I'm sure Sophie would agree with that assessment. And many people have worked hard on this. The point is that, we have to be united in our in dealing with the root causes of what is going on, because it has. Remember, terrorism has a disproportionate effect on our communities, and that is.
My question was: Will passenger name records? Passenger name records? Having them for for 5 years for people taking airplanes, is that going to help in the fight against terror?
It's one tool. It is one tool in the box. It is one of many anti-terrorism measures, and it was one that we were responsible for within the European Parliament. It is one that we had legal competence for. But there are many other measures that the member states have competence for, and they should also concentrate on ensuring for their citizens, the citizens of the EU, the people that we represent, that they are adding value, that they're sharing intelligence, that the police forces are working well with intelligence services. Concentrate hard on these things, because there will be no longer the luxury of having these gaps in having a terrorist atrocity and then in the days afterwards saying, look, we missed this or we missed that. People have to be working at the maximum of their capacity, and that includes, by the way, the European Parliament.
Etienne Drouard.
The passenger name record issue is just a tool, yes.
These PNRs, as they're called.
Yes. What is it? It's your plane ticket recorded by your plane transportation company. 14 years ago, we agreed, because we had no choice, that any plane starting from Europe and landing off in the US would have to provide the list of its passenger name record before arriving in the US. And if you don't provide the list to the US authorities, your plane cannot start or could not take off in the US. We agreed as Europeans 14 years ago to provide this information to National Security Agency in the US, to transportation ministers in the US. 14 years ago, we chose not to protect the privacy of Europeans because we wanted US intelligence services to get this information, because their threat was, if you don't want a plane to take off in the US, we need this information. And as a parliament, we said yes. 14 years after, the question is, should we do it for ourselves within Europe? The answer is definitely yes. Why did we take 14 years to discuss about the privacy of European citizens when we send information to the US and we don't even provide this tool, even if it's not an answer or a solution, to our police services?
Sophia Infeld, your thoughts?
I won't comment in too much detail, because I've been following this file from the very, very start, and it isn't entirely accurate what's being said. But let's focus on this. I think the French government is actually running a campaign of lies. I'm not afraid to say that publicly. They say Parliament is blocking a European PNR system. That is simply not true. As a matter of fact, my group, the group of Liberals and Democrats, we had proposed a true European system with compulsory information sharing and on the basis of a regulation that would enter into force immediately. Instead, the governments have categorically refused this. So what we are voting on now, in probably by the end of April, is not a European PNR system. It is 28 national systems. It will be based on the directive that will take at least 2 years to be transposed into national law. And there will not be any more information sharing than is currently the case. In other words, a lot of data will be stored, but the value of that to fighting terrorism is well, dubious, to say the least. So, and it's got nothing to do with the United States, because we didn't actually agree to send it to the United States. It's not as that was displayed. And I think you should give intelligence services, security services, law enforcement services the tools to do their job. But then it should bring more security, because if it doesn't bring more security, then what's the point? And as a matter of fact, national governments received a lot of money. The French government, for example, got 17 million euros for the creation of a national system for the collection of PNR data. So I'd really like to understand what happened to the money and what the French government has been doing. And if it wants to collect the PNR data, there's absolutely no reason why they can't already do so today. So if you want a true European PNR system with sharing of information, which is the added value, then you should have voted for our proposal. But this is not what the French government is proposing.
Guillaume Denoy de Saint-Marc, is the French government lying, as was put by Sophie Infeld?
I would say that that's much more communication, but and I'm a bit fed up about all this communication for many years. I'm looking for action. Really need you know. Do
you agree with her idea of compulsory data sharing between intelligence services?
I don't really care if it's done properly. If we do it for the Americans, why not for Europe? You know, that's not the point. What is important is to be in action. We spoke about prevention. We spoke about many things. I think.
So why is it that they don't share?
No, but in general, there's a lot of communication about all that. And I have the feeling that for many years, we only had communication. There is a big event happening, and there's a bombing, a terrorist attack, then we have a communication, and then nothing. And it has been this for many years, especially in France. And I'm very fed up about what's going on in France, because nobody did really take care of a strategy on prevention. There is no strategy. There is only communication. That's the feeling we have as victims of terrorism. Which is not the case in UK, where there is a real strategy who has been built. It is good or not, that's not my point. I think it's rather good. But anyway, they brought civil society, government, everybody together to find things. Here, we are in starting point. We have been asking for many years to create the RAN France, bring all the practitioners who are French practitioners who are working in different working groups for the Commission to have meetings in France and to see, okay, how can we apply all the good practices in France? I've been asking this since 2012. I did 2 meetings, one in 2013, one in 2014, and I learned that the RAN France is going to be created in a few days, and we are not involved in it. So it's crazy. We have been working for years and years on something, and we're not even... We are really at a starting point, and there is no strategy in France.
Etienne Drouin, do you agree with Sophie Infeld's proposal for compulsory data sharing among intelligence services when it comes to counterterrorism?
Yes, and I do agree also with the story of this balance and the position of the French government, not because this French government. When I was talking about a 14 years story, it is true. And we don't have any such debate when we transfer information in the US. So this is my point. It's not the answer, but when you have a tool, when you know it may be useful, when you want it to be compulsory, vote it, make it, and start to be efficient.
Claude Morris, I can't help noticing you're having a Brexit referendum in the UK. How would the British feel about compulsory data sharing with their EU neighbours?
You know, there is so little reporting of PNR in the United Kingdom, but there is a lot of discussion about anti-radicalisation. And I have to say, even this government, the Conservative government, which is not my government, has stepped up again anti-radicalisation measures. And I agree with your guest that if we don't do this, we are going to be in deep trouble, because this cult-like jihadism is continuing. These people don't care about our freedoms. They don't care about PNR or anything else. And that needs to be a big facet of our tools in the box, if you like. On PNR, I think, frankly, what Manuel Valls has been saying is he's been complaining about when the vote is going to take place. I don't think it's anything deeper than that. And the vote is going to take place. That's the end of it. The Parliament will be voting in May. End of story. the Parliament will have discharged its obligations on this one legislative aspect of its responsibilities. Let me just add that member states like France, like the United Kingdom, like Belgium, have so many other laws to enact, so many other things to do. The Parliament has a limited suite of options when it comes to security measures, particularly in legislation.
But should there be compulsory data sharing? Should there be compulsory data sharing?
Well, yes. I mean, PNR is one aspect of that, but let's look at data sharing. Let's look at something like the Prüm Convention, which my own country, the United Kingdom, has opted into. We have an opt-out, which irritates many other countries in this area. The Prüm Convention is something where you have to share vehicle licensing data, fingerprints. And look at the way that countries have been reluctant to enact legislation. Many countries simply don't transpose legislation. Many countries don't implement the Prüm Convention. I mean, this is a very important lesson for us, which is that after every Intergovernmental Justice and Home Affairs Council, you see security measures not being implemented by the member states in terms of data sharing. And that needs to be better known amongst citizens, because an obsession with PNR is pretty unhealthy. You need to think about all the tools in the box to fight terrorism, because as your guest said, that's what the purpose is. As well as de-radicalisation and prevention. I think we really don't have the luxury anymore of waiting around and making a fetish of any one particular tool in any box anymore. This is not a theoretical discussion. People are dying and people are being terrorised, and many young people who are European citizens are being radicalised. Their lives are ending in this cult-like jihadism. I mean, and they are European citizens. I mean, this is a crisis, and I think we need to... PNR is just one small aspect of this.
All right, just one final question. I'm going to put it to you, Guillaume Denoir de Saint-Marc. The attack that took place at the airport yesterday takes place at check-in, doesn't take place beyond security. Are we headed towards a new reality when it comes to air travel, with more security in train stations, a new way of living?
We have to go on living as we always did. There should be more security, but at the same time, every time you put more security on a place, then the target is going to be changed. So that's why prevention is so important. That's why we also have to be prepared, unfortunately, as European citizens, to be prepared to another attack. And the governments should all help us to bring all the perpetrators in a trial. At the moment, some of your European countries are preventing some of the terrorists from perpetrators of terrorist attacks that happened many years ago, of course, but they're still protected in the country where they're living, and they cannot be brought to France for judgment. And this is not acceptable in a terrorist attack, that you don't have justice.
The need for justice.
It's very important. So there should be much more collaboration before and also after a terrorist attack.
Guillaume Denoir de Saint-Marc, I want to thank you. I want to thank Etienne Drouard. I want to thank Claude Morris for being with us from London. Sophia Intveld in Brussels, thank you as well. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. It's time for our Media Watch segment.
Hi, François. Well, we're going to start with a soundbite that has got quite a lot of reactions on social media and by journalists. A reaction from the US, Ted Cruz.
US presidential candidate.
That's right.
Texas senator.
That's right. Let's take a listen to what he thought was the way to deal with, or the lessons that we need to learn from the Brussels attack. Oh, apparently we don't have that thought. But in any case... yes, he
was calling for, I believe, to have police patrols in Muslim neighborhoods.
Right, and The Atlantic, picking up on that, has been talking about, well, what both he and Donald Trump have been saying we should learn from Belgium, and indeed what the Atlantic points out is that this would really alienate the vast majority of law-abiding Muslims. This sort of behaviour is actually counterproductive. But they do also point to a statement that was made by Donald Trump regarding this as a problem of assimilation, which we often have this debate in France about integration versus assimilation. In other words, in the US, you tend to keep the identity of your origins and sort of transpose it onto American values, whereas in France, for example, you're meant to sort of blend into the French nation and all of that. But in any case, the Atlantic actually agrees with Donald Trump that this is a problem of assimilation. They say today American Muslims are far more integrated than Muslims in Europe. And according to a 2011 Pew Research poll, only 20% of American Muslims surveyed would prefer to be distinct than to adopt American customs. In other words, it is part of the problem is a lack of, well, whatever model you want to go with, integration or assimilation.
Do you agree with that, Etienne Drouin, that we don't celebrate our differences in France enough?
Yes, I do. And I'm afraid that the politicians we have will change and will be much more dividing our society because we don't celebrate enough what makes us different, but also together.
Because we did see that in this country when we won the World Cup back in 1998,
exactly.
Talking about that, of people of different origins.
Well, a lot of headlines now pointing to, I suppose the isolation, social isolation of a lot of people living in the Brussels neighbourhood of Molenbeek. You've had articles, for example, in the Belgian press saying, Merci Philippe. Now, Philippe, that refers to Philippe Moureau, who was the Belgian Socialist Party mayor or bourgmestre of that district in the 1990s. And basically, he accused, oftentimes when Belgian media tried to point the spotlight on a lack of, I suppose, assimilation in this neighbourhood, they were accused of being racist, etc. And what a lot of the press in Belgium are now saying is that this was a problem that was allowed to get out of hand. There was a sort of omerta regarding radicalisation in that neighbourhood.
So it's ironic, thank you, that we're seeing.
That's right. And Michel Sapin also got into some trouble, the French finance minister, for saying that there was a certain naivety on the part of the Belgian state regarding issues in Molenbeek, and that wasn't necessarily very well received in the Belgian media.
Wasn't well received by our panel either.
Right.
James Creed, many thanks. I want to thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.